Have you ever received a phone call at 3 a.m.? Not from family, not from friends, and definitely not for something good. That night, beneath an old bridge, a homeless man slept in a torn coat. 3 a.m., the phone vibrated inside the torn pocket of his coat. The sound echoed through the cold darkness beneath Bridge No. 14, where the stench of damp concrete, garbage, and the rumble of trucks overhead blended into something heavy and oppressive. He opened his eyes. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming. No one called him at this hour. There was no one left. He pulled out an old phone, the screen cracked at one corner. Battery, 5%. Unknown number. He stared at it. His fingers trembled. Was it the police? The bank? Or some cruel joke? The ringing stopped, then it vibrated again. He closed his eyes for a second, took a deep breath, and answered. "Is this Daniel?" a calm male voice asked. "We need you at the office at 8 a.m. today." Daniel sat up abruptly. His heart pounded so hard his ears rang. "I'm sorry. Who is this?" His voice was hoarse from cold and hunger. There was a pause on the other end. Then the man said slowly, "If you don't come, this opportunity will not come again." The call ended. Daniel stared at the dark screen. 8 a.m. He looked down at his worn-out shoes, his frayed coat, and the backpack that held everything he owned. An old notebook, a pen, and a crumpled photograph. He let out a quiet laugh. A homeless man. Being called to work at 8 a.m., if this was a dream, he hoped he wouldn't wake up. Stay with me until the end, to see what happened next. Three years earlier, Daniel Morgan was still what society would call normal. Not rich, not remarkable, no grand ambitions. But he had a life that made him believe he was on the right path. A small accounting job at a mid-sized company. A rented apartment, not big, but clean and quiet. And a wife who used to sit across from him every evening and ask, "How was your day?" More than anything, Daniel had a simple, almost naive belief. If you work hard, everything will be okay. That belief stayed with him for years. Until it shattered. Everything didn't fall apart slowly. It collapsed all at once, as if someone deliberately pulled the last plank from beneath his life. The company went bankrupt. The notice arrived in an email on a cold Monday morning. No apology. No compensation. Then came the investment he made on the advice of an old friend. It's safe. Guaranteed profit. Daniel believed it because he wanted to believe. That mistake led to credit card debt. Small amounts, then more. Until the number on the statement became something he couldn't even bring himself to open. Arguments filled the small apartment. At first, about money. Then silence. And finally, one evening, his wife walked out with a suitcase, saying she couldn't take it anymore. Daniel sold the car, then the furniture. Then he lived in the car. He kept telling himself, just temporary, until one morning he walked out of a convenience store. And the car was gone. The bank had repossessed it. The first night under the bridge, Daniel sat for a long time. His back against the freezing concrete. Traffic roared overhead without pause, as if the world was still moving forward. And he alone had been left behind. He remembered thinking, just for a while. I'll get back. 3 years passed. No one called. No one asked. No one waited for him to return. And so Daniel Morgan disappeared. Not because he died, but because no one remembered he existed. Daniel didn't beg for money. He knew money only solved one night. What he needed was time. Enough to keep himself from disappearing completely. Every morning, before the city fully woke up, Daniel stood outside the public library, waiting for the guard to unlock the doors, as if waiting for the last mercy society still offered him. In the ground floor restroom, he washed his face with cold water, looked in the mirror, and tried to recognize himself. Not the homeless man in worn clothes, but someone who once had a profession, discipline, and belief that he still had value. Then he went to the second floor, old books, faded spines. Daniel chose finance books, not because he was sure he'd return to the field, but because they were the only thing that made him feel like he still had a working mind. He took notes carefully, not to show anyone, only to prove to himself, I haven't given up. At noon, he used the library's free computers, limited time. He used every minute, relearning what he'd lost, updating knowledge he knew was far behind. One afternoon, as the closing announcement played, Daniel hurried to pack up. His notebook slipped from his hands and fell to the floor. A man nearby bent down to pick it up. He flipped through a few pages. You take this pretty seriously, the man said. Daniel startled. He wasn't used to being noticed. Old habit. He replied cautiously, I used to be an accountant. The man looked him up and down, no pity, no contempt. Just a precise, assessing gaze. Do you have an email? He asked. Daniel hesitated. Yes, but I don't check it often. The man nodded, as if it didn't matter. Send me what you're studying. He paused. If it's good, I'll read it. No money. No promises. No encouragement. The conversation ended there. But to Daniel, it was the first time in many years that someone looked at him not as a homeless man, but as someone who might still be able to prove his worth. And sometimes just that is enough to keep a person from letting go. Daniel worked like a madman, not because anyone pushed him, not because there was a deadline, but because he knew this might be the last time life gave him a reason to try. By day, Daniel stayed in the library. He studied. Not the kind of studying done to kill time, but the kind done by someone clinging to the very last rope. He took notes relentlessly. Every formula, every concept, every small example he had once skipped because he thought he already knew it. Daniel analyzed everything slowly and carefully. He asked himself, if I were the reader, how would I judge these lines? Were they clear enough? Practical enough? Or were they just lifeless theories? At noon, when the library closed temporarily, he sat on the front steps and hurriedly ate the cheapest thing he could afford. Then he returned the moment the doors reopened. At night, when the city sank into dim yellow lights, Daniel left the library. He didn't go home, because he had no home. He sat beneath a familiar street lamp, where the light was just enough to read, not bright enough to draw attention, not too dark to make him give up. Daniel rewrote everything by hand, not because he lacked a computer, but because writing by hand forced him to rethink every sentence. Each time he made a mistake, he crossed it out. Each time he crossed it out, he learned why it was wrong. He corrected every small error. Some were just a number in the wrong place. Others were old ways of thinking he was forced to leave behind. Cold wind swept through. His hands went numb. Ink smudged across the pages. But Daniel did not stop. He didn't know who the man from that day was. Didn't know what he did for a living. Didn't know whether he had even opened the email. Maybe the man forgot Daniel the moment he left the library. Maybe that notebook was just a random moment. But Daniel kept working, not to impress anyone, not to be praised, but because, for the first time in many years, he had something more important than money, a reason to wake up every morning. Each day, Daniel asked himself only one question. If today were the last day, I still had a chance. Would I have done my absolute best? And in the darkness of long nights beneath streetlights, Daniel began to change. No one noticed. No one witnessed it. But page by page, the notebook filled. Thoughts grew clearer. And every morning, he woke up no longer just to survive, but to keep moving forward, even though he still didn't know where that path would lead. 3 months later, at 3 a.m., the phone vibrated. A short, dry sound. but enough to tear through his restless sleep beneath the familiar bridge. Daniel sat up instantly, his heart pounding as if his body had been waiting for this moment for a long time. The call lasted only a few seconds. No explanation, no long introduction. Just a simple cold command, and no room for negotiation. When the call ended, Daniel sat completely still. He stared at the dark phone screen, as if it might say something more. Then he stood up. Outside, the sky was still dark. The city hadn't woken yet. Only a few passing cars cut through the silence, leaving faint streaks of light across the wet road. Daniel walked quickly toward a public restroom a few blocks away. He stood in front of the mirror. Fluorescent light washed over his gaunt face, sunken eyes, and wrinkles that had arrived too early. Daniel turned on the faucet, leaned down, and let the freezing water crash against his face. He washed for a long time, not just to wake himself up, but as if trying to wash away 3 years of a life that had gone off the rails. He looked up at his reflection. No longer the man who once had a family, a job. Not yet someone ready to walk into a polished office. Just a man standing between two worlds. Daniel adjusted the frayed collar of his coat, smoothed out the useless creases, tried to straighten his back a little more. He knew he didn't have much time, no decent clothes, nothing to hide the truth of how he was living. But he had something else. 3 months of discipline. 3 months of studying in silence. 3 months of working like a man with no way back. Daniel took a deep breath. Just get into that room, he told himself. The voice in his head didn't tremble. It was strangely calm. Just one chance. He turned his back on the mirror, stepped outside, and for the first time in a long while, Daniel Morgan walked toward a place where he no longer had to avoid other people's eyes. The office was on the 18th floor. Daniel stepped out of the elevator and paused. The silence was unsettling. No traffic noise. No damp concrete smell. Only soft white lights and an orderliness that made him feel out of place. His heart pounded. The man from that day was already in the room. He stepped forward and held out his hand. "You came." Daniel shook it. The grip was firm, not cold, not rushed. "Yes." "Good." The man looked Daniel straight in the eye. "Because we only need people who've been to the bottom." The words made Daniel pause for a moment, not out of shame, but because, for the first time, his past wasn't something that had to be hidden. The interview began. No resume, no computer, no list of achievements. Just 2 chairs, an empty table, and the clock on the wall starting to tick. They didn't ask about degrees, didn't ask about former companies, didn't ask how he had lost everything. The first question came. "If you lose everything again, what will you do?" Daniel thought for a few seconds, then answered honestly, "I'll start over, one day at a time, because I know I can survive at the bottom." The second question followed immediately. "What are you most afraid of?" Daniel clenched his hands. Images of freezing nights under the bridge flashed through his mind. "I'm afraid that one day I'll get used to not trying anymore." The man didn't react. He simply listened. The final question came slowly. "Why haven't you given up?" Daniel met his gaze. "Because if I give up," he said, "then everything I've lost would mean nothing." The clock hit the 27-minute mark. The man stood up. The interview was over. No promises, no conclusion. Just one final look. As if Daniel had been placed on a scale. And for the first time in a long while, he felt he hadn't been dismissed from the game. Daniel was accepted as an unpaid intern. No welcome session. No congratulatory email. No one walking him around to introduce departments. Just a short sentence. "You can start today." No assigned desk. No fixed chair. Daniel sat in a corner of the room, where there was still an open power outlet. No business card. No title. His name didn't appear on any official list. And there were no guarantees. No one told him he would be kept on after the internship. No one promised a future. There was only an opportunity. Fragile, silent, and capable of disappearing at any moment. Daniel moved into a temporary housing unit a few bus rides away from the office. A small room, thin walls, a dim yellow light. But it had a lock on the door, a bed, and a place to put his backpack down without fear of it being taken. He lived with extreme frugality. Breakfast was dry bread. Lunch was the cheapest thing he could buy near the office. Dinner was sometimes skipped altogether if he had to stay late. Daniel worked twice as hard as everyone else. Not because he wanted to prove anything, but because he wouldn't allow himself to miss a single detail. He arrived earlier, left later, took more notes, asked fewer questions. While others took lunch breaks, Daniel reviewed the numbers. As the office slowly emptied, he stayed behind, correcting even the smallest errors. No one knew he had once been homeless. No one saw the nights he curled up beneath bridges. No one knew why he never complained about pay. And Daniel never told them, not out of shame, but because he understood that here, the past mattered less than what he could do while he was present. Every evening, when he returned to his temporary room, Daniel sat on the bed and exhaled slowly. His body was exhausted, but inside him was a strange feeling. For the first time in many years, he wasn't just surviving. He was taking small steps toward a life he hadn't dared to believe he could reach. Some nights, Daniel sat alone in the dark office. Most of the lights were off. Only the faint blue glow of a computer screen illuminated his tired face. The silence was so deep that even the old air conditioner humming above became painfully clear. Daniel was tired, not only from working too much, but because every day he had to convince himself that these efforts were not in vain. He was lonely. Among rows of empty desks, Daniel realized he was always the first to arrive and the last to leave. No one checked on him. No one waited to turn off the lights with him. And doubt began to creep in. He stared at the numbers on the screen and wondered, what if I fail one more time? What if this opportunity disappears like all the others before it? Those questions clung to him in the darkness of the 18th floor, while the city below remained brightly lit, unaware of his existence. But then Daniel remembered the freezing space beneath the bridge, the hard concrete, the cold seeping through every layer of clothing, the shock of waking up at night to the roar of traffic overhead. Compared to that place, this dark office was still warm, still had light, and still had something he had once lost. A chance. Daniel took a deep breath and sat up straight. He returned to his work, fixed each small error, continued working in silence, because he understood perfectly if he stopped, the only place waiting for him would still be the bridge from years ago. And so Daniel continued. Time passed quickly, and what is meant to come will come. Daniel stood on a stage, white lights shining directly on him, blurring the audience below. Hundreds of faces looked up, waiting. He took a slow breath and began. 10 years ago, I slept under a bridge. The room fell silent. And what saved me wasn't money, he continued, his voice steady, unshaken, but someone who gave me the chance to prove that I still had value. Daniel paused, letting the words settle. But I also learned one thing, he went on, that if I hadn't worked as if I had nothing left to lose, that opportunity, no matter how precious, would have been just a door that opened and then closed. He looked out at the audience. No one is saved by luck alone. We are saved only when we are willing to step through that door. Then Daniel smiled softly, not the smile of a victor, but of someone who had traveled very far, from a place he once believed he would never escape. Thank you for listening until the end. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to the channel to hear more stories with me.